On behalf of the National Gang Center, welcome to the webinar, Addressing Gangs, Introduction to OJJDP's Comprehensive Gang Model. I'm Sean Baldwin, and I work with the National Gang Center, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. The National Gang Center is supported by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and this webinar is a product of that support. We're thankful for OJJD's support, but we do want to remind everyone that the material presented here today does not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Department of Justice. We're fortunate to have Scott Petrus, a senior program manager with OJJDP. He's online with us today, and I'd like to invite him to join us for a few comments.
Thank you, Chief. I just wanted to thank the National Gang Center for putting on this webinar today. The comprehensive gang model is something that has been critical to the efforts of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention as we've moved forward over the past many years. And it's going to remain a critical tool as we address issues throughout communities throughout the nation. I just wanted to mention and put on your radar that last week the Biden-Harris administration released a press release around their investments in community violence interventions. And it has impacts for the work that you do, whether it be violence interrupter, hospital-based violence intervention, implementing the comprehensive gang model on multiple levels. There's a substantial investment from the Department of Justice and other agencies, including OJJDP. Just so you know, this is public because it was in the release that came out last week. We as an OJJDP office will be, by the end of the month, releasing a solicitation on comprehensive youth violence prevention and reduction programs, which certainly can utilize one or more elements of the comprehensive gang model. So be on the lookout for that. If you have not subscribed, you can go to our www.juvejust.gov. JuveJust is within our OJJDP.gov. You can link on JuveJust to register. Also, the National Gang Center can assist in getting out any relevant solicitations as they become available. Also, we're focusing on strategies to support children exposed to violence and providing some funding that'll be coming out by the end of the month as well for that. I think both of these initiatives would have import into the work that you do. Also, we're going to be uplifting community violence intervention initiatives through our National Gang Center. So through additional webinars that will be coming up, we'll be talking about models and including street outreach and violence interrupters, types of programs that can help interface with this sort of work. So with that, I just want to thank you, and thanks to the National Gang Center. I turn it back to you, Chief Baldwin.
Scott, thanks so much for joining us and for your support. We certainly appreciate it. So as we get started, I'd like to briefly introduce everybody to the National Gang Center. The National Gang Center exists to help communities implement comprehensive solutions to prevent gang violence, reduce gang involvement, and suppress gang-related crime. The bottom line is if your community is suffering the impact of gang-related community violence and crime, the National Gang Center is here to help. And probably the best way to reach out for that help is to visit us on our website at thenationalgangcenter.gov, and we'll provide contact information later in the presentation if you need that. So I'd like to sort of get started here with a poll and ask everybody what strategies or programs their community is using to address gang violence. So I think we have somebody working to bring the poll up now. There we go. And just as a reminder, you may need to expand that box or scroll down. If you could select one or as many as you see there that you are currently using, feel free to, if you've got another strategy or something that you don't recognize there, hit those indications. So give everybody just a second here to look over the results there, and you can close that poll. That'll help guide us as we go through the presentation today. If you entered other strategies or programs not listed, if you wouldn't mind going to the chat box and just describe the program that you're using. We'd be interested to hear that from everybody. So we can move we'll talk a little bit about the sort of the process today. The purpose of today's webinar is to introduce you to the comprehensive community-based strategy for addressing community violence. We'll provide an overview of the OJJDP Comprehensive Gang Model and its 5 core strategies. We'll provide some examples of how the model is being used in communities across the nation. And then we'll discuss the model, how the model can help you expand and or strengthen gang reduction efforts that you have in your communities. So just some sort of a layout as we move forward here. The webinars start with a presentation from 2 experts in strategies for addressing community violence. Following their presentation, we'll have time for your questions. And finally, we'll point you towards some resources that may be helpful to you in this journey. All participant audio and video has been disabled so that you can focus on the presenters. However, we do need your help to make this webinar a success. And there's a couple ways you can do that. First of all, please use the chat feature. I see that some people are already doing that. Please continue to do that to discuss the presentation with other participants. Our staff and the presenters themselves will be monitoring that chat and can join in as appropriate. If you need any technical assistance at all, if you're having any problems, you just ask for help with the technical issues there, and we have staff on hand here that can help you out with that. And then finally, you should have at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. We'll use that Q&A feature for questions that are specific to the presenters. So as the presenters are presenting, if you think of a question, type it in that Q&A box, and that way we can make sure that we get to your question and answer that. So, and finally, just want to remind everybody that this webinar will be recorded, and we'll send that link out to everybody once it's available. So with that out of the way, I'm happy to present our 2 subject matter experts that we're presenting today. Dr. Celeste Wadalakwicz is a senior resource associate with the Institute for Intergovernmental Research and works with the National Gang Center to provide technical assistance to communities, implementing the OJJDP Comprehensive Gang Model. Celeste holds a PhD from the University of Florida and has more than 20 years experience in youth services, violence reduction, and training, including serving as director of one of the original comprehensive gang model sites in Riverside, California. Paul Callanan is the president of the Callanan Group and works with communities throughout the nation to develop comprehensive solutions to address community violence. He has over 30 years experience doing this, including serving as the director of the Gang Reduction Initiative of Denver, which was also known as GRID. So with that, I'm going to pass the presentation on to Celeste, and she'll take it from there.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. We know this is a very important topic for all of you. And so what we're going to start with this afternoon and this morning for some of you is just a brief overview of the comprehensive gang model, just a little bit of background, and then I'll be talking about some of the core features of the OJJDP comprehensive gang model. So the OJJDP comprehensive gang model is a multi-systemic approach to reducing youth gang violence. And it was developed in the late 1980s, 1990s. Dr. Spergel was the inspiration for the comprehensive gang model. And some of you may be familiar with Dr. Spergel, but he did his research out of the University of Chicago, and he first implemented the program in the Little Village. It was known as the Little Village Project, and it was really aimed at reducing gang violence among youth that were contributing to the violence. So it's a very targeted, in a sense, targeted approach, that meaning that you have a focus for working with youth that are involved in gangs or very high risk for gang involvement. Some of the, under this umbrella, what you'll see is this umbrella concept, if you will, is there are some key features. So I just mentioned it was a focus on gang involved youth, obviously. There is a shared responsibility. So an important feature of this, the comprehensive gang model, is that it's not just one agency leading the charge. It's shared among multiple agencies. It's a collaborative effort, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about some of the people that will be involved, some of the agencies that will be involved in this effort. It is targeted and data-driven. That is a really important feature of this model. You have to understand where the violence is occurring, who's contributing to the violence, and that requires an assessment. Many of us and many of you out there who are already working on these types of initiatives understand or have an idea of where the violence is occurring and who in fact may be contributing to that violence. An assessment will then help you to confirm what you already believe and know, or it may lead you in a different direction in terms of who may be contributing to the violence, what age group it may be, what areas may the violence be occurring in. So this is a very important feature. It requires community engagement. So the model itself, as I mentioned, it's not a one agency leading the charge, but it's a community engagement. It's community being involved, because the communities where gang violence is occurring have to have a voice in this process. So that's a really key feature. It's evidence-based. And what do I mean by evidence-based? If we look at programs or programming that come under the comprehensive gang model, these evidence-based programs are those that have more rigorous outcome evaluations, and they demonstrate effectiveness by measuring the relationship between the program and the intended outcome. So an example of that, and I saw some of you, I saw the list of your experience. So trauma-informed care was one of them, school-based approaches, street outreach. So many of you may be familiar with aggression replacement therapy. So that would be an evidence-based practice that you can incorporate as a social intervention into the comprehensive gang model. And that would be used for those that are really, at high risk for gang involvement or involved in gangs. Within the comprehensive gang model, there's a prevention component, and there's an intervention component, and there's a suppression component. And I'll talk about all three of them because it's just not one strategy. And we know we can't arrest our way out of the issue, right? So there has to be prevention, there has to be intervention, and there has to be suppression or accountability. In the original model, suppression component was referred to as social control because it offered a wide range, meaning that everyone that was involved in the project held youth accountable because we know that they could aspire to a different level of behavior. So accountability is built in to the comprehensive gang model. There's a street outreach component as well. And the street outreach, you heard Scott during the introduction talk about maybe credible messengers or violence interrupters. Some of you may be familiar with those terms. A street outreach person is someone, sometimes they're from the neighborhood, sometimes they had lived experiences, and they're making direct contact with people out with identified youth or youth that are identified for services, and they will be connecting them to services, but they themselves provide a really important service in building those relationships with them, engaging them, and helping them to change their behavior. But again, they do part of the violence interrupters, so they'll do mediation. Sometimes they'll go to schools, sometimes they'll go to the family's homes. They do a range of services. And then there is case management within the comprehensive gang model. And that is requires multiple systems or multiple agencies. For example, it could be probation, employment person, school-based counselor, outreach, and other people that you deem necessary to be at the table. So it's understanding what is affecting the youth and seeing how you can best intervene. And it also does require law enforcement to help the team understand what some of the issues are of safety in the community, and how to best protect themselves, protect the families in the community, and protect the youth. So we can, and one of the things I want to say is that this is very metrics based, and so tracking is very important to see the progress. And I just another comment on the previous slide is Don't be overwhelmed by all of these features, because some of you may be already doing this. There are ways to enhance what you're doing, or perhaps you can connect something additional onto something you're already doing. So the comprehensive gang model in action, right? So this model has been implemented in many sites throughout the United States. Some were previously funded, some are currently funded. And as you can see, it's no small feat. It's some of the programs or initiatives that were previously funded have been successful in sustaining some of, if not all of the components of the comprehensive gang model. And that was through the work that they were doing, through the monitoring, through the assessment, and through showing that their programs were successful and were really contributing to the reduction in youth gang violence in the community. And that's very important, because some of these programs, after federal funding went away, and it was no longer available to them, they had built relationships. They had communicated the importance of the comprehensive gang model and the benefit in reducing gang violence. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Paul will talk about that later in the presentation. So here are some key facts about the model. It's designed for areas with serious violent youth gang problems. And again, that goes back to your assessment. You may want to refer to an assessment, because it's going to help guide you in what type of program you actually need. You may do the assessment and determine, you know what, we don't need or something similar to the comprehensive gang model, because our issues, we found out our issues are really related more to drug addiction or something else. So it's very important to have that, but it is again meant for serious violent youth gang problems. It is an adaptable framework that can be molded to fit the needs of the community. And this model has been implemented in rural communities as well as large urban areas. And we know resources are different in every area. The context is different. So it is adaptable. There is a structure that we provide that we help people understand. But again, it's adaptable to what your resources are in the community. It's shared responsibility and accountability for resolving the gang problem. Again, it goes across the line. Everyone obviously is coming to the table because you see there's an issue in the community, and everyone comes together to address those issues as well. So why it works. I would say that these are the 4 pillars really that we need to look at. The expertise is shared among agency. So everyone's contributing to the solution. Everyone's talking about how to best approach gang violence on an individual level, but also on a community level. Addressing that in terms of comprehensive gang model, and Paul will discuss that later, just the breadth of the comprehensive gang model, because you can talk about even environmental design within the comprehensive gang model. If there's street lighting on a certain park, if there's enough surveillance, and by that I mean, is there a pathway? Maybe somebody's going from school to home or school to a certain area, and there's no surveillance in the sense of making sure that youth are protected, that youth aren't being bullied on the way home or being recruited into gangs. The community involvement in the planning and delivery of the interventions is very important. Bringing people to the table, having those early discussions about what is really affecting the community and what types of services and interventions would help. Again, going back to what has worked, evidence-based programs, what has worked, what has been tried, and how you can implement that in your community. Case management services that are personalized and personalized to individual clients. These are tailored services. So it's not a one size fits all. Again, we go back to using something that's evidence-based, something that may be a promising practice. Also, we talk about evidence-based program, but if there's something in the literature that shows that something's showing some benefit, again, evidence-based programs are always like at the forefront, but promising practices can sometimes be useful depending on the resources in your community and your ability to implement certain types of programming. And then incentives to change offending behaviors. And this includes educational opportunities, tattoo removal, and financial assistance. And interestingly enough, when Scott talked about the way that you can implement the comprehensive gang model, even for hospital-based violence prevention type programs, trauma centers, all these are connected because they're a way to improve the health and also affect the behavior of youth. If you're helping someone to get their tattoos removed, they can then have more success in getting a job or getting that job interview, feeling better about themselves. And then also educational opportunities. Are there additional programs that are out there that you can connect with? And again, I want to say this is not about creating your own internal programs for this initiative, but it can be connecting to other agencies that are providing these services already in the community, and that you may have to tailor them in a different way, maybe to meet the needs of the gang-involved youth. But it's not requiring you to use additional resources. And I want to really emphasize that because we know that resources aren't as abundant as we'd like in most cases. So we have to work together, and that really is that expertise shared among agencies. I can't tell you how many times I've talked with different sites and they've come up with these incredible ideas of ways to provide services to youth and families in community, or bringing access to certain types of programming that was not available just because they've been working together and sharing their resources and their expertise. So I think that's a really key point. So next slide, please. And these are the targets of the model, obviously: gangs, youth, family, and community. So we're working with that at multiple levels to address gang violence and to bring opportunities. So it's a matter of bringing opportunities, creating access to resources for family, youth, and the community. And Paul will go into much more detail about this and the comprehensive approach to bringing in needed resources and providing public safety to all. So this is a balance of activities. It's prevention. Again, within the comprehensive gang model, a lot of the resources generally go for intervention services because you are dealing with a certain age group, and it's not generally intended for the youngest youth. Nonetheless, there is a prevention component that is a part of the comprehensive gang model. And this may include, again, going back to this sharing of resources, it may include that you bring someone into the program, into your initiative, or you're working with someone who is currently gang involved or very high risk for gang involvement, and they may have a younger sibling who needs some resources. So you work with the family and you can connect them to resources in the community, and work with the family as well. Intervention, this is activities involved that are aimed primarily for gang involved youth, or again, those that are very high risk for gang involvement. And then the suppression activities, these are aimed at serious offenders. So for programming, if you knew that you had an open case, or perhaps law enforcement had a case that they were building against someone who was involved, who was suspected of murdering someone, this wouldn't be somebody that you would necessarily be reaching out to at that time because there is an ongoing investigation, but there's serious offenders that are contributing to the violence in the community, and enforcement activities are necessary at that time. That doesn't mean that, and just to clarify this for everyone out there, if law enforcement were to identify someone and they thought that they would benefit from the services, meaning that they're out there and they're doing something, they may be involved in something, but they could also refer them for services. So just some clarification on that, because we always feel like nobody's beyond help, No one's beyond somebody working with them, intervening with them to help them to change their behavior. So that's an important piece. Next slide. Oh, and I'm sorry, we had a poll question. Maybe we could just put that poll question here. So is your agency currently involved in to reduce youth gang violence? Okay, so we have about 52% that said yes, 28% no, and do not know about 19%. Okay, so many of you are already involved in some type of effort. For those of you who aren't, don't despair. It's not a, it's something that's achievable, and Paul will be talking more about that. But it is achievable. It's just starting small, I think. So with the strategic collaboration, there are multiple partners that we generally have for involved in the comprehensive gang model. It would include law enforcement, employment services, health and social service agencies, schools, a research partner if you're able to. A local university would be ideal, or a local partner that is skilled in doing assessments and evaluations. And community outreach and probation and parole, and then city county leadership. Faith-based organizations are also very important to this process, as well as community leaders, and as I mentioned, law enforcement too. So it really requires multiple agencies coming together to work towards addressing the youth gang initiative. As I said, even if you're starting and you don't have a coordinated strategy at this point, it really just requires a few champions in the community, and that can be at a leadership level. And ideally it comes from the leadership, but it can also be people working on the ground that are bringing attention to the issues in the community, and getting to talk to leaders about what they see in the community and how they would like to address some of those issues, and bringing about whether it's this program, if you decide on this type of model, or a different initiative, one that works for your community. We encourage you to do that. But Paul's going to be talking about that, and so I'm going to go into the next slide. This is the CGM structure to give you an idea. So you start with the steering committee, and that would be made up of the individuals or the agencies I spoke of just previously on the previous slide. It can vary from place to place. Who are the key players? I think it's, again, if you can start with a smaller group and those champions in the community, that's where you start. It would require a project coordinator. Ideally, we say it would be a full-time person that's dedicated to the project. Again, depending on your needs, that's always something you can look at and see if it's even a possibility to have somebody on full-time. You would have an assessment group, part of that steering committee, somebody that's actually working on assessing and looking at the data that's coming in, and you would also have a research partner. This is an ideal situation. This is kind of your structure. You may have to substitute it for different pieces, let's say, because you may not have all, like a research partner available. So you may have someone that is very skilled, whether it may be somebody in a different agency that can do a type of assessment for your initiative. And then working through that, you would have all your components, your prevention, your intervention, and suppression. They'd have to work in tandem. And then your street outreach and an intervention team. The street outreach workers are the ones that are going out, meeting directly with the youth, and having very consistent, intensive contact with youth that have been identified for the program. The intervention team is members of the steering committee, or it's not members of the steering committee, but representatives that are from the agencies on the steering committee. So it could be a probation officer, a police officer, it could be a mental health service provider. Obviously, the street outreach workers would be on that team, and then someone from the an employment agency, mental health services, public health, depending on what your focus will be. And then that's where the case management occurs, where you actually discuss the youth. And there's a lot more information that we'll have time in upcoming webinars to discuss more in depth on both the street outreach and the intervention team, because they're very important pieces. But there's a lot that goes into both of those strategies. And then you move into implementation, and implementation is monitored throughout the process. So these are the 5 core strategies of the comprehensive gang model, and Paul will be discussing those more in depth. Community mobilization really is the community engagement and collaboration of all the not only the steering committee, but people in the community leaders, people that really are from the community, that understand the issues that are happening. Opportunities provision, that speaks to your training and employment. We know that many of these youth are interested in employment, but are they ready for employment? So this is a piece that we really focus on, and can you actually get people from the business community that can serve as mentors, or just helping them through that process. Social intervention is obviously your mental health services for youth and families. It's like the aggression replacement therapy I spoke of, as well as trauma-informed care approaches. Your suppression is community policing, and informal and formal controls and accountability measures. So formal control would be, arresting someone, taking them off the streets. Informal controls, holding someone accountable and having measures in place, monitoring their success, and then working with them to help them change their behaviors. And then organizational change and development, that's your broad working with systems, actually affecting the way systems operate, maybe changing some type of feature within the organization that is not conducive to youth doing well, or for youth accessing certain types of services that are needed to help them lead productive lives. So, and that might be something that would require some kind of a legislative action. And that's, again, going back more to the steering committee and the work that the steering committee can do in conjunction, I will say, with the community, and what the community is interested in doing as it relates to reducing gang violence in their neighborhoods. So with that, that's just a brief overview, but I will turn it over now to Paul Kellerman. Paul?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Celeste. I want to spend the next next 15 minutes really talking about and giving a better understanding of what the core strategies are. These strategies do outline the strategic framework of the model, and they will guide who you're going to partner with. They're going to guide what type of strategies you're going to put in place. They're going to guide what type of success or outcomes that you're looking for. Next slide. So I think it's appropriate for us to start with community mobilization first. At this time in our country right now, we're talking a lot about reimagining public safety. What does that look like? And what a better time right now than this talk about how do we build partnerships between the community and our law enforcement agencies. And under this model, community mobilization addresses that. Public trust is critical to the success or the sustainability of any violence reduction project we put in play, right? The people that we're serving, the community that we're serving, they have to have a buy-in to what we're doing. They have to believe that it's actually helping and not harming. And there's an easy way to do that, and the model sort of guides you in that. And that is, we value the community input. We value the community as an equal partner in this project. Under the comprehensive gang model, the community plays a very large role. And what I mean by equal partner, it means that the community groups, a diverse group of representatives from the communities, service providers, residents, ex-gang members, again, a diverse group, they have equal say in the entire project. It means they have a voice, and they actually have ownership of the project as well, too. And what I mean by that is, And there's different phases of your projects. There's planning, there's development, there is implementation, there's evaluation. There should be community representation on all aspects of that. So any structure you put in place, the community should have a voice and be aware of what's going on. If there's a decision-making process, the community should have equal power to make that decision and equal voice in improving what directions we going. And we develop that community engagement really through the structure of the model itself with policy steering committees and other groups. We want to make sure that the community has a voice, and that they're being heard, and that they're being valued, and they have a say of what's going forward. The second component of community mobilization that's very important is community ownership of the project itself. Often we partner with communities, we take their opinion, and then we put something in place. And we say, well, we got your opinion, now we're putting it in place. This model requires you to take it a step further. It says now the community is going to own a lot of strategies. So the ability not only to have a voice and decision of how we move forward and how what's being funded and what strategies we're implementing, but how are those strategies designed and implemented and really customized for the uniqueness of the community, where the community has a say in that based on their experience, their knowledge of what's going on. So community is an equal partner, and the key to remember is the value that we place on all of our community partners in this project. Next slide. I want to just give you 2 examples of community mobilization, what that might look like. I think if you look into your communities, what you're doing right now, you're going to identify hundreds of examples that are already going on within your community. But these are 2, one is long-term, one is short-term. The long-term one in Denver was the Safe Summer, Safe Holiday 90-day violence-free event. And basically what that was is we had a cross-street section in our northeast section of Denver. On one side of the street, there was a liquor store, candy store that was really ground zero for one of our gangs in Denver. But right across the street from that, there was a Boys and Girls Club, there was a Parks and Rec Center, and a public library. And on this particular summer, as we were entering the summer, there was an increase of shooting. So the gang members were hanging out at the liquor store, the candy store. It was easy targets, cars were coming by, there's a lot of drive-by shootings. Sometimes the gang being shot at would shoot back, and those bullets would land across the street at the Boys and Girls Club, the rec center, and the library. And what was happening is there was a fear that during the summer, kids and families could not enjoy those resources that were available to them. So the community actually took the lead on that, came together and said, look, we're only going to plan this for 90 days. We want to make this summer safe. We want to make sure that our kids can be there, that you can utilize this stuff. And they designed a whole project where Celeste mentioned environmental design. They looked at the flow of traffic. They changed the flow, temporarily changed the flow of traffic. They reached out to gang members that lived in that neighborhood. They reached out to rival gang members that were coming into that neighborhood to explain what they wanted to do. They ensured they had events every weekend. They had people patrolling that neighborhood during the school days or during the summer days. And in a nutshell, basically in that 90-day period, there wasn't a single shooting. So it really showed the power of when a community comes together. Now, when that 90 days was up and that coalition sort of fell apart, the shooting went back up, right? So it's just on the short term, definitely community has the power to stop violence. The Southwest Denver Coalition is a little bit different. That was a community implementation team that came together to help our project in Denver to implement it in the Southwest area. But they really came together and clicked really well, and they wanted to do more. So they actually eventually grew into their own nonprofit. This is a community representatives, community organizations in that area. They grew into their own nonprofit called the Southwest Denver Coalition, where now they engage the community in projects not only in violence reduction, but health and safety, human trafficking, drug intervention, and substance abuse intervention, suicide. So they became a key component of that community of really ensuring that community voice is heard. So short-term, long-term, they've been up and running now for almost 10 years. Pretty impressive. Next slide is opportunities provision. And what this slide really talks about, what this component really talks about, is addressing those deficiencies that a lot of our youth that are involved in gangs face in the areas of education and employment, right? We know gang membership correlates with long-term negative consequences in these areas. Kids that are involved in gangs get in trouble at school. They tend to be higher rates of suspension, higher rates of expulsion, zero tolerance policies that push them off out of the school altogether or into alternative schools that may be full of other gangs that or conflict. So they really lose a lot what they're gaining in their connection to schools. The fact that gang members tend to get arrested more often than others, they're in and out of jail, juvenile facilities, it prevents their ability to grow those skills necessary to secure employment in the future, particularly those who have felony arrests and stuff. So if we're going to ask individuals to walk away from a culture, we got to be able to make sure that we're going to help them remove those barriers that are present for them to become self-sufficient and move forward. We want to be able to look at that and say, look, we're going to help you on this. And we do that in short-term and long-term plans. We want to be realistic, right? We're not going to say to a kid who has a fifth grade reading ability that you're going to become a journalist tomorrow. Doesn't mean that future, it can't happen, that you want to get there. But we want to look at the short and long-term plans. And we want to make sure that we're using assessments, educational assessments, as well as educational assessments. On the educational side, what's their ability, what's their learning ability, is there IEPs, are there programs we can put in, or can we get tutors for these kids? What can we do to help them improve their success at school, building relationships at school? How can we include them on that policies that, unfortunately, our kids out of school needs to be addressed? And on the employment component of that, we're looking at a realistic approach as well, too, is a lot of times young kids, they got to make money to support their family. They need a job, so they're willing to take what they want. So there is a difference between getting a job that suits their immediate needs of helping to pay rent. For older guys coming out of jail, you got court fees and community corrections, you're paying rental fees, etc. But we don't want to negate the fact that we want them to be able to build into something long-term sustainable. So vocational type programs, skills programs where they can learn and grow and sustain themselves. So just remember, whatever strategies you're putting in place, education, employment, extremely important. Next slide. So I want to give you an example of really two strategies. There's one up here, projects actually that were kind of unique in a way, probably on the far extreme of, wow, this is what people did, but they're really innovative and kind of gives you the idea. There was a program in Riverside County years ago where an individual that owned an airplane company, it was like a big fabricated airplane parts and redid airplanes and rebuilt them. They brought on a group of kids that were involved in a project in Riverside and said, look, I'm going to teach you how to do this work. I'm going to teach you how to rebuild this or refabricate planes or how to, work on these planes. But I'm going to guarantee you this, if you stay with me, I'm going to help you grow. I'm going to help you start your own company with us. And during the course, I think a lot of the individuals dropped out, but towards the end, there was a couple there, and he upheld his pledge, that individual. And he actually he taught them the skills, and then he helped them form their own their own company, subsidiary of his own company. And what did he do? He would contract work to them. And it was amazing because I believe that company's still up and running today. And that was probably 15 years ago. So it shows that commitment that business owners can have in helping our youth. And the other one I want to talk about real quickly is educational. I had the opportunity to work with a fine young man many years ago who was about 16 years old, lost his two brothers to gang violence in 1 year. Hardcore, the family was hardcore. His educational level at 16 was probably about that of a fourth grader. We had a teacher that we worked with in a probation school that took an interest in him and decided to tutor him. And she tutored him every day after school and built a great relationship with this kid. But within 1 year, his educational goal, his educational level went from like a fourth grade to almost a ninth grade. So we know that active interest, we know bringing people up can really help. So great examples. Next slide. Social intervention is really that service provision of how we're going to address the gang intervention, how are we going to provide services and treatment to those that are involved in the gang culture or those that are at risk. Social intervention not only talks about how we engage active gang members, but it does fall under the line of prevention, secondary type prevention services that we can put in place, that services to keep kids from joining gangs as well as getting out. And also kind of aligns itself with re-entry as well, too, of those programs necessary for those individuals coming out of custody or institutional type programs. But there's some key elements that I think we need to understand when we talk about social intervention. And first is, what is gang intervention? How do you define it? In your own site, have you defined what gang intervention is? Is it getting someone through probation? Is it preventing, reducing recidivism, preventing them from committing crime? Or is it actually limiting or creating a lower level of embeddedness within the gang? So we have to really think about from site to site, what do we collectively believe gang intervention is? What we do know is gang intervention, it's a process, not a program. It's a process full of pushes and pulls that pull the individual in different ways. One day they want out of the gang, the next day they're being brought into the gang. So it's important that we build this process of intervention in our model instead of relying on just one program. What I mean by that is, how do we capitalize on these opportunities of pushes and pulls that are occurring? What does our process of intervention look like? Do we have the right partners? Do we have the right partners that are going to identify clients for us and make those referrals? Do we have the right partners that are going to engage those clients once they're referred to us? Engaging mean, are they going to bring them into the project, trust the project? And then we have enough service providers that are going to work with these clients across multiple risk factors. Two key elements of this model, which really requires you in a social intervention area, is the use of a multidisciplinary intervention team. We know that the risk factors related to gangs and the risk factors that we're facing with kids are extremely high, right? Especially kids in gangs, trauma, cognitive distortions. We're looking at substance abuse, higher levels of unemployment, families, dysfunctional families, a lot of issues that we deal with. No one agency can do that. The idea as a multidisciplinary team is coordinated case management, where we bring experts together in their own disciplines. They're experts. We rely on each other. We develop a coordinated case plan. Coordinated for the youth and the family. Coordinated case plan is actually beneficial too, because it depends on the state that you live in. On some cases, sometimes you live in a state and the kids in dual systems. They're in human services, they're in criminal justice, and they got multiple case plans. So you want to use a coordinated case plan process, and an MDT, multidisciplinary team, can do that. The use of outreach workers is critical. We know that outreach workers serve as a wide variety of purposes in gang intervention, whether peer specialists, whether mentors, whether case managers. Someone has walked that path before, it could be very, very powerful. We did actually a long-term study in Denver, the benefit of outreach workers. We found them very beneficial as a catalyst to change for the individuals that we've worked with. Next slide. So what does that look like in practice? Just to give you an idea of some good projects. Los Angeles, the GRID project. If you haven't looked at their project, look at their project for secondary prevention. They used a risk assessment tool to determine the risk factors related to kids that are getting services and what type of programs they should be put into. Not all kids that are exposed to gangs are going to become gang members, and we want to be real careful how we design programs. They also have a Volunteers of America program that's part of their system out there that really focuses sort of on indigenous healing processes. So again, be unique in what you're trying to do and how it relates to your community. In Providence, Rhode Island, they're a perfect example of a wide geographical area. Their 3-city nonviolence approach is really looking at violence reductions, but coordinating those services and using the resources from 3 different cities in that area. Pretty impressive to do that. They focus on trauma informed, they focus on violence mitigation and youth support. And in San Antonio, Texas, Bear County. They focus really on probation youth. They have an interesting program where it's really trauma-informed case management. We hear that a lot with trauma-informed now with gangs. We saw that on the poll. Next slide. So I also want to talk a little bit about suppression. In this time right now, we may be scared to talk about suppression, but suppression is equally important in this model. There are individuals that are driving violence. We know who those individuals are, and we need to deal with those crimes and the gun issues that are going on in the community. So we don't shy away from suppression. Suppression actually is the balance between formal and informal social controls. Formal social controls are those projects or strategies put in place that address the activities and behavior of gangs in the community, specifically the criminal activities. Could be special legislation in your area, specialized gang units within law enforcement or correctional agencies, specialized prosecution, but it also encompasses, policies, school policies related to gang activity on campus as well. The informal social controls are really about how do we, communicate the norms and values of our community? How is the community itself stepping up? It could be, hey, I'm going to, question that individuals on my street. Hey, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this? I'm going to say, hey, this is the level of violence that I'm going to tolerate. Beyond that, I'm going to, not tolerate it anymore. So it's really how the community comes together and basically translates and communicates to the individuals that we're working with, of, this is acceptable, this is not, and how do we intervene outside of maybe a formal structure of law enforcement. So next slide. So what does that look like? We talked about targeted patrols. We talked about vertical prosecution. I really want to talk a little bit just real quickly on the community norms and values aspect of this. 2 examples I'd like to give you. One of those, you guys that are doing sort of group deterrence approaches to gang violence, you're doing offender notification meetings, you're doing call-ins. When we're talking in this area, we really are talking about that moral voice message. Is where, on a call-in meeting, if you're not familiar with that, you bring in a certain amount of individuals for certain purposes, and you say, hey, look, this is what's going to happen to you. Law enforcement delivers a message. This is what's going to happen to you if you continue down this path. This is how we're going to respond to it. But then there's an equally important component of that where the community members stand up, whether it's faith-based, whether it's community leaders, whether it's community activists, and said, look, you know what, you're a part of our community. We love you, but we're not going to tolerate the shootings. We're not going to tolerate the violence. We want to help you, but this is our line. This is where we're drawn in the sand. That is a great example, I think, of what an informal social control would look like in this project. Next slide. Organizational change and development. This is, to me, is the most important element of any of all the components of the comprehensive gang model, because really it is guidelines about how we work together. We know that reducing gang violence in our community or gun violence requires a cross-sector coordination. Easier said than done. So how do we come together? How do we work together? How do we put policies and procedures that allow us to share information, that allow us to share names, whatever it is, we have to figure out how to do that. And the first step is that I call it sort of that self-reflection stage, where we as an individual in the project, or we as an agency in the project, we have to assess our own capacity and willingness to change and work with our partners on this. That means we're looking at an organizational structure, we're looking at organizational processes, we're looking at organizational norms and how we do business. Do we need to do something different in our agency that aligns us in a better position to help out with the shared vision of what we're trying to do? How do we change? And speaking about changes, and when you're doing violence reduction, you're dealing with behavior changes, you're dealing with elements that change on every single day. You're also dealing with a change in knowledge of what's effective, what's not. So as an agency that's participating in this process and in this collaboration, you make a commitment to this collaboration, you also have to have the ability to be very flexible. We learned something, this is not working, we're going to shift. You can't be that organization that says, oh, no, it's going to take us 2 years to shift. Right? We got to shift now. We got to be able to move. So organizational change is really that ability of an individual or organization positioning itself to be a valuable partner in the collaboration. Next slide. To give you some examples of that, I know like in Fort Pierce, their Ignite program, Youth Alliance program, they had to handle the amount of strategies that they had placed, they had to create a structure that had multiple levels of partnerships, which was a huge undertaking, and organizations were willing to do that. They sat down and they created this management structure that was able to really address everything that they were doing. Riverside County was one of the original sites, listed that. Really unique example of even how law enforcement outreach workers can work together. Doesn't mean that one's the informant for the other or not. It's that they respect each other, they value each other, they move forward. In Denver, we did a minor change. We had to get a city policy, city charter change to hire ex-felons just to come work for us in the Department of Safety as outreach workers. So again, you're looking at what you need to do to change. So all 5 components are equally important, but they do provide that framework as to when you're developing your master plan. Next slide. And I think at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Sean regarding summary and maybe some questions. Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to have Celeste join us also. So as Celeste is joining, Paul, I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question. You saw in our polling earlier that some communities have strategies and some communities do not have strategies. So to sort of sum all of this up, for a community that does have a strategy, what do you think are 2 or 3 most important things that they should look for in their strategies to make sure that they're doing?
Well, I think if you have a framework in place already and you have a written framework, is even more important, because we want to be transparent of everything that we're doing. So we want people, internal and external, to know exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it. I think when you're looking at strategies, one balance of strategies across the spectrum, whether you're using the 5 components of the model, I like those, or whether you're just going off of suppression, intervention, prevention, an equal balance of strategies across the board that's going to engage people and build that trust. A second aspect of that is, does your strategies involve the diversity of your partners? What I mean by that is, often we have all these partners, but when we start to put out strategies, involves the same 3 partners. So you want to take advantage of all the partners that you have at the table and be able to leverage their resources. You also want to take a look at, do your strategies align? Celeste mentioned doing an assessment of the gang problem. Do your strategies align with what your assessment's telling you about your gang project? If you have an increase to gang violence, gun violence in your community right now, and it's skyrocketing, but all your strategies are prevention, you're not going to get anything until down the line, any results of that. And then the last thing is just really on sustainability. What percent of your strategies are based on existing resources versus what percent of your strategies are based on grant funding?
So I hear loud and clear, you've got to do prevention, intervention, and suppression. You can't just do one.
Correct.
Right? Okay, correct. Awesome, very good. So Celeste, for you, you work with a lot of communities that don't have a plan at all. What are the 2 or 3 things that they should be looking at immediately?
I think they should get together with like-minded people, people that see the issue, and start small. You don't need a big group. You don't need to have a large group to start your plan. I think it starts with the discussion, actually.
That's good. Partnerships are critical. Absolutely. No one agency that can do it all, which actually leads us perfectly into our next session here. We want to answer some of the questions that we have been getting online here. And I know that our staff has been working diligently to try to respond to those. We want to answer every single question. So we're going to get to some that we have queued up here. So the first question I'm going to give to Paul and let him try to handle this. So in many communities that are dealing with gang violence in particular, it's viewed as a police problem, and it's pretty much left up to the police to develop strategies to handle. Is that a good response?
Absolutely not. And that's what's nice about the comprehensive gang model. The answer is in the name of the model itself. It's comprehensive. It requires all of us in the community. It requires a collaboration between a diverse group of stakeholders. So you're bringing community to the table. You're bringing parents. Someone had a question about parents. You can have parent groups. You can bring a wide, diverse group of people to look at this problem from different angles. And then it's joint ownership of the problem as well as joint ownership of the solution. So no, it does not just fall on police. If you fall on police, you're looking at more probably law enforcement, more of a heavier suppression effort. You want to balance that. You bring in the community, you bring in service providers, you bring in your clients and their families as well.
All right, I see a question here about human trafficking in gangs, and that's a huge issue. We actually did a webinar, which is posted to YouTube. We'll try to send the link to the person specifically that asked that question. But if anybody's experiencing issues with human trafficking in gangs, it is a huge evolving issue. So we did a webinar on that. I want to refer people to that. Question for Celeste. If a community already has a prevention, intervention, or some type of law enforcement program that they feel like is working in their community, do they need to drop those programs in order to adopt the comprehensive gang model?
Absolutely not. Comprehensive gang model is a framework, so it's an opportunity to enhance what you're already doing. And if you already have those, well, kudos to all of you, because that's already part of the comprehensive gang model. So yeah, you may be able to add on to what you're already doing or enhance certain features.
Celeste, if somebody wants to implement the comprehensive gang model, what do you think are the next 2 or 3 critical steps in the process?
Well, I think you need to do your research. This is part of it. This is a great step. And to look at, the various frameworks out there, look at what your issues are. If you feel like you have a serious gang problem in the community and you pretty much can confirm that, I think that the comprehensive gang model is a great framework to implement some strategies to address that. I think it's also good to look at the resources you have in the community and the political will to start some type of initiative. I think that's really important.
Good. And we have some people asking for the link to the YouTube video that we have for the webinar for human trafficking, and we'll have our staff post that in the chat so that everybody has access to that. So I think with that, we've got just a few minutes left. I think I want to move on to our resources. I want to thank Paul and Celeste. Thank you so much for sharing all of your 50 years or more combined experience doing this in the communities. And I know that I just want to invite everybody, if you need assistance from Celeste, she works with the Gang Center, and you can get a hold of us at the Gang Center. We can get you in touch with her. So thank you so much for that. So I wanted to end our webinar here with a couple of thoughts. One, if I'd ask everybody just to hold on here for just another minute or so. We're going to end with a survey. We would love to get your feedback. It's important for us. It helps us. So hang on for just a second. You'll see, if we could go back a slide to the resources. Okay, so you'll see these resources that are available on the National Gang Center's website. If you're interested in the comprehensive gang model or just looking at comprehensive strategies and solutions for addressing community violence, this is a great place to start. These resources are accessible directly through the National Gang Center's website. So visit that site, and we'll have that information is available to you there. And now if we could move to the next slide. If you have want more information beyond what we presented here in the webinar, or you want to be notified of future webinars, or we do workshops about the comprehensive gang model, feel free to send us an email to information@nationalgangcenter.gov, or drop a comment real quick in the chat, and we'll follow up with you and make sure that you get that information. Just a reminder, we will provide to everybody that's registered, we will provide a link to the presentation once it is the recording is posted. So finally, I'm going to take you to our online evaluation. You can either scan that QR code with your smartphone, or you can follow the link that has been dropped in the chat box, and we would really appreciate it. You take the survey. I promise will take you less than 2 minutes to do, and it'll be extremely helpful for us to guide our work into the future. So lastly, on behalf of the Gang Center, I want to thank everybody for joining the webinar, and we will leave this link up for about a minute here so that everybody can get access to it. So thank you very much.